here I have some sample data. So just remember, this data may not look exactly like yours. It's just made up data. So I have some sample data so that I can walk you through the calculations required for the antacid effectiveness data, and then the post-lab question 6, which also uses this data. So I've recorded here 2 different antacids, Rolaids and Tums. You also are going to have multiple antacids. Depending on your class, you could have 2 columns or even 3 columns. How it worked is I assigned you and your partner one of the antacids, and I assigned other groups the different antacids. And before you left class, you were supposed to exchange data so that every group would have either 2 or 3, depending on the class. So your class should have been told if you had 2 or 3. So I just have 2 example sets of data here. So on this page, on the data, we do have to calculate what step for step 11. And to calculate step 11, you're going to take the number in step 5. So for step 11, which is the last thing, it's going to equal the number you have in step 5 minus what you have in step 10. Okay, so using a different color pen just to emphasize, to figure out what goes into this box down here, I'm going to take this number, which is in step 5, and I see up here I just wrote step. That's step 5. Sorry. You're going to take that step 5, and you're going to subtract step 11. So for the Rolaids, I would take, 23.391 grams and subtract 23.343 grams. Okay, so I'll subtract those 2. And then for would be Rolaids, and so I get 0.048 grams in my calculator. I can write it up here too. Let's see, 48. And then for the antacid 2, Tums, you would take the number, the 14, so it'd be 14.130, and you would subtract 14.102, and we would get down here 0.028. Okay, so that's on this page, the first calculation that you would need to do. Okay, so that's that, just subtracting. Now let's look at question 6 to see how we use this data here from this data table in part C to answer question 6, A and B. So for A, it says use the tablet masses you measured to calculate the percent by mass of each active ingredient in the antacid table. Okay, so what we're going to need to do, I'll try to use a highlighter. So first, for Rolaids, there's 2 active ingredients. So we're going to take this number right there. So the amount that you read off the label, so 0.675. And that was calcium carbonate. So that's then you're going to divide that by the total mass of the tablet, which is this number. Okay. Whoops, I almost put a 0, but it's a 1. It was 1.752. And then it's a percent, so you're going to say times 100. So it would be 0.675 divided by 1.752 times 100. And I get to three significant figures. This first one is 38.5% calcium carbonate. Okay, that would be the first part. But there's two ingredients. So let's do the second ingredient. And the second ingredient is going to be the magnesium hydroxide. So this time we're going to put this number, the 0.135, over the total tablet. So in both of these cases, the bottom number is going to be the same. So we're going to put the 0.135. That was the grams of magnesium hydroxide. Okay, hydroxide. And we're going to divide it by the same number I did before. That's the mass of the tablet. And so, times 100. It's a percent. So, times 100. And that's going to equal, sorry, it's crowded. Yours probably will be too. So 0.135 divided by 1.752 times 100 is 7.71%. And that's the magnesium hydroxide. So in this first problem, we have the percent of the calcium carbonate is 38, and the percent of the magnesium hydroxide is 7.71. Now, if I were to do the second antacid, it's a little bit simpler because there's only one thing. And you would be doing all of these, if you have, for every antacid, even if it's not yours, you're going to do the calculation. So again, to find the percent concentration, you take the amount of active ingredient there, so 0.5. That's the calcium carbonate. And we're going to divide that. This should say question 6 up here. Divide that by the total amount for this example. So that's going to be, in this case, the 1.297. And then times 100. Okay, so if we do that math, we get, 38.6% calcium carbonate. That's interesting. In this pretend data, both of them have about the same amount of calcium carbonate. Okay, so, and if you had 3, you'd have to do 3, but this answers the first part. So we used the tablet masses, that was the bottom number, and we used the amount of active ingredient found on the label to figure out the percent of each active ingredient. Now, I didn't mention here, and it might be too late for some of you. You'll have to go back and fix it. But it all has to be in grams. I guess I didn't think about it because all of my data was in grams. But if they gave you active ingredients in milligrams, you're going to have to change it because you have to have the same unit on the top and the bottom. And so to convert it, you just use 1 gram equals 1,000 milligrams. All right, so let's look at the second question. It says, using the values calculated in the... Using the values calculated in 6A, calculate the mass of each active ingredient you use to neutralize the acid sample. All right, so we do need to have a little piece of data here. The data we need is to know how much of the sample we used. So in this case, we're going to come down here, and for Rolaids, we're going to use this number. That's how much of the sample we used. So we need that. So 0.048. Okay. So we have first, let's do calcium carbonate, because that's the first one I have up here. You take that number from the first page, 0.048, that's how much we used. And now you're going to multiply it by the percent. Now where we're going to get this number is right here. So calcium carbonate is 38.5% of this antacid. And a percent means out of 100. So we're going to say 38.5 grams of calcium carbonate in the 100-gram sample. So we're going to say 0.048 times 38.5 divided by 100. And I get 0.018. So what I calculated is I need 0.018 grams of calcium carbonate to neutralize my sample. And then now let me look at the other one. So the other one is magnesium hydroxide. It has the same amount, like this number here. If we go back, for this question, we're using the number in blue. And so that's just how much sample we used. So the first number is going to be the same on both examples. So it's going to be 0.048 grams. That's how much of the antacid we used. But the magnesium is a different percentage. So it is 7.71. Let me use a different colored highlighter because that was so close to what we are doing that you might not have seen me highlight it right there. 7.71. So it's 7.71 grams of magnesium hydroxide in 100 grams. That's what a percent means. So that equals, and I'm just going to have to work it out a little there, 0.048 times 7.71 divided by 100. And I get, it's not very much, 0.0037 grams of magnesium hydroxide was used. Okay, so that calculation for the first antacid tells me how much of each active ingredient was used to neutralize that specific sample we worked with. So now let's do this for antacid 2 so you can see it. So to figure out the percent, we need to know, this is going to be for calcium carbonate because we only have one. And we need to know how much sample we used. And so I come here, it's right here. Oops, sorry, I don't want to draw a big line through it. I meant to get the highlighter right here. 0.028 for acid 2. So it's 0.028 grams of the calcium, our sample, And then the number we need is up here. So we had 38.6%. So that is 38.6 grams of calcium carbonate in 100 grams of sample. So that equals 0.011 grams of calcium carbonate. All right, so what it tells me, just looking quickly, now antacid 1 has 2 ingredients. So I can't really compare the magnesium hydroxide. That's kind of a variable. But I can look at my calcium carbonate, just comparing them. And I can see that this antacid, acid 1.018, used more than antacid 2, right? So in my example, the antacid, it said, when you get to question C, it says rank the antacids you tested by the mass of the active ingredients required to neutralize it. And if I were to rank it, antacid 1 used more than antacid 2. Right? Because antacid 1 used 0.018 grams of calcium carbonate, and antacid 2 used 0.011 grams of calcium carbonate. And then it wants to know, okay, is that consistent with part D? And your answer could vary, but just how you think about it. So is it consistent with the data? And I look, it's a little different, isn't it? Because antacid 1 has a lower percent of calcium carbonate, but I used more. And antacid 2 has a lower percent of calcium carbonate. So you'll have to think about it. You might think maybe it's not consistent. Maybe having the 2 ingredients had an additional ingredient. So, or maybe you might, as someone wrote in their observations, maybe one of them dissolves faster than the other or mixes faster than the other. And so then that might change the effectiveness. So there's different reasons why the amounts that you have or that you use might not match the percentages. It could be a variation in ingredients, like different ingredients. It could be that one didn't dissolve as easily as another, and so then if it's not dissolving, it's not really being as effective. It could be what else could we have? I guess those are the 2 big things I think right off, just if I'm just brainstorming off the top of my head. And you might come up with some other ones. So anyway, I hope that this helped you at least know where to place the numbers, and then try to think about the answers, especially for number D, thinking about why or why not, if it kind of matches the concentrations that you calculated in part A. Just think about the variations. There could be a whole different number of answers or reasons that we could come up with. And as always, if you run into trouble, please let me know and I'll try to get it a little more clear for you.